The restaurant was one of those places where the air itself seemed expensive, perfumed with truffle oil, aged wine, and the faint chill of money. Soft jazz filtered through hidden speakers, and the waitstaff glided between tables like dancers in a private ballet. I hadn't been in a place this upscale in over a year. Not since I quit the job my parents had worshipped like a religion. Not since I left behind the path they had so carefully paved for me, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice, their version of love. The table was long, full of people who knew how to speak fluently in degrees, promotions, IPOs, and second homes. My family, a couple of their business friends, some high-ranking cousin who was now some VP at some international firm. Everyone dressed like the stock market, never dipped. The linen napkins probably cost more than my shoes. I wore what I always wore, neat, modest, a little too simple for the occasion. No one commented, but the glances said enough. I shouldn't have come, but when my mother called last week saying, "It's just dinner, the whole family. It would be rude if you didn't show your face," I had caved. It wasn't an invitation, it was an obligation. That's what family was in my house. Not warmth, but duty. We were midway through appetizers when it started. "So," my father said, putting down his wine, "you're still doing that creative thing." He said creative like it was a disease. I swallowed the piece of bread I hadn't even tasted. "Yeah, I've been building a small design studio. Freelance work mostly, but it's growing." He blinked slowly, then turned to the man beside him. His colleague, someone with gray at the temples, and a Rolex that probably had its own insurance policy. "See, I told you, left a 6. Figure job to chase Instagram likes." Laughter erupted across the table. Not loud, just cruel enough. "I didn't leave to chase likes," I said quietly. "I left because it wasn't what I wanted." "Ah," my mother chimed in. "Because wanting stability and security is overrated now, is it?" My cousin Arjun leaned over with a mock whisper. "I think they call it being a free spirit." More laughter. I felt the weight in my chest start to build, the familiar one, like drowning politely. It was the kind of pressure that came not from shouting, but from being told with a smile that you weren't good enough, that you were a failure, politely, publicly, professionally. "You know," my mother continued, slicing into her salmon, "we just want you to be realistic. It's hard watching you waste your potential. Hard for you," I said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. The table quieted momentarily. I could feel every eye turning to me, the quiet one, the soft-spoken child who always agreed, nodded, stayed small. My father gave me that look, the one that said don't start. Not here, but I'd already started. "You raised me on the idea that success was the only thing that mattered. You picked my college, my major, my job. You called me practical, disciplined, obedient, and then I tried to be all those things. I did everything right." The silence deepened. No one moved. And the one time I said, "This isn't making me happy," you acted like I'd betrayed the entire family. My father leaned back. "We sacrificed a lot for you. We gave you the best. You gave me a script," I said, "and when I stopped reading it, you called me a disappointment." His jaw clenched. My mother's hand froze over her wine glass. Across the table, Arjun cleared his throat and changed the subject. Something about real estate in Singapore. Everyone followed his lead, grateful for the escape. I wasn't surprised. I was used to being ignored when I didn't say what they wanted to hear. Dinner continued, but I had vanished from the conversation. I sat there, smiling when necessary, chewing food I couldn't taste, nodding at jokes I didn't hear. I caught my father looking at me once, not with anger, but with something worse, pity to them. I was still the investment that didn't yield, the child that didn't come with interest. It was always this way. Ever since I was little, my victories were theirs, and my losses were my own. When I won awards, they said, "Of course, you did, we worked so hard for you." When I stumbled, they said, "We expected more. We raised you better than this." That night, every old wound reopened. I remembered being 12 and crying quietly in my room because I got a B+ and didn't want to disappoint them. I remembered sitting in the office of a job I hated, calculating how many years I'd have to smile through it, just to earn their respect. I remembered quitting the fear the guilt, and the silence that followed. Even now, as a grown adult, sitting at a table that should have felt like home, I felt like a stranger wearing their name. When dessert arrived, something decadent and ridiculous, my mother reached over and touched my hand. "We're just worried," she said gently. "We want you to be okay." I looked at her. I wanted to believe her. But worry wasn't the same as love. Worry came from fear. Love came from trust. And they had never trusted me to know myself. "I am okay," I said. She didn't answer. She just smiled, that tight, strained smile people give when they don't believe you, but they're tired of arguing. And just like that, the warmth of her hand vanished. When the bill finally came, a thick folder, discreet leather, intimidating in its presence, I already knew it would be obscene. The number scrawled at the bottom was $4 $213.86. My father chuckled. "Well, that's what you get for good wine." He reached for his wallet. But before he could open it, I spoke. "I've got it." He paused, surprised. "So did everyone else. You don't have to. I want to." I pulled the card from my jacket, black, minimalist, quietly powerful. The table went still. My father squinted at it. "What card is that?" I placed it down on the folder, just something I earned. You wouldn't know it. The waiter returned, nodded politely, and carried it off. Within seconds, he came back, approved. "Thank you, sir." My parents didn't speak. My cousin was the first to break the silence with a soft whistle. "That's not a beginner card." I smiled and folded my napkin. "No, it's not." After that dinner, the voices didn't stop echoing. They never really did, just retreated into the quieter corners of my mind, waiting to resurface at the worst times. "You threw it all away. We expected more. It's hard watching you waste your potential." I walked home alone that night, ignoring offers of a ride. I needed the silence. I needed the air. I needed space from the smell of money, from wine, soaked lectures, and backhanded concern. It was almost midnight by the time I reached my apartment, smaller than the bedroom I grew up in, but mine. Peeling paint near the windows, a heater that coughed instead of working. Still, it had more honesty than the house I left behind. I tossed my coat on the chair and collapsed onto the futon, letting the tension sink into the cushions. The room was dark, except for the soft glow of my laptop charging in the corner. A dozen notifications blinked on the screen: client emails, design requests, a new payment received. But I didn't check them, not yet. Instead, I closed my eyes and I remembered. I remembered the gold, framed photos on our living room wall. My parents had a tradition. Every time I brought home an award, they framed it, not for me, for guests. My school achievements were trophies they polished when convenient and forgot the moment I needed help. Once, in 9th grade, I got second place in a national art contest. I was proud, so proud. They looked at the certificate, smiled politely, and said, "Second place is just the best loser." It sounds small. It wasn't. Because they didn't even mean it cruelly. They meant it sincerely. They believed that love meant pushing. That pushing meant pressure, and that pressure made diamonds. Except, I wasn't a diamond. I was a kid who started drawing in secret after that. I didn't stop, I just stopped showing them. They never wanted an artist. They wanted a product, a golden child. A result of their sacrifices. I don't know when exactly I stopped being a person in their eyes, but I felt it happen slowly, like watching a building sink into the ground. College was their choice, business, economics, safe, sensible, a job at a multinational straight out of graduation. A desk, a badge, a suit, an identity they could explain at parties. It paid well, it drained more. Every morning I took the train in, I'd feel my chest tighten. My hands would shake while opening emails. My stomach would turn before every meeting, but I kept going for them. I smiled in pictures and sent updates home and said, "Yes, everything's going great." Because that's what you do when your failures feel like someone else's shame. Until one day I snapped. It wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no cinematic quitting scene. I simply woke up one morning, opened my laptop, stared at the glowing spreadsheet on my screen, and couldn't move. Not out of laziness, but out of emptiness, the kind that wraps around your spine and whispers, "This isn't your life." It never was. I sent my resignation that afternoon. I expected fear, regret, guilt. I felt a relief. Then the fear came later in waves: rent, bills, debt, the suffocating knowledge that I'd burned the only bridge they respected. And the worst part, they didn't even ask why. They just stopped calling. I lived quietly for the first few months after quitting. No job, no direction, just long nights staring at my bank account and wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. I freelanced when I could, took odd jobs, sold old clothes, ate instant noodles, and learned to stretch $20 for a week. But in those quiet nights, I started drawing again. Not just for money, for breath, for life. I posted designs online. I built a small portfolio. Slowly it grew, a few commissions here, a logo there, a small client overseas. Then another, but I didn't tell anyone, especially not them. I was tired of trying to prove I was worth loving. There were times I almost gave up, like when my landlord gave me a notice, or when a client ghosted me on a $500 invoice I needed to buy groceries, or when I overheard my aunt saying, "He's still finding himself, poor thing," as if I'd been lost on a trail somewhere, waiting to be rescued by a real job. But every time I wanted to crawl back to safety, I remembered how empty that safe life had been, so I kept going. Quietly, fiercely, alone, I found a niche visual identity design for ethical startups, brands that weren't trying to be flashy, just honest. Clients who didn't care about my background, only my work. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not for the school I went to, not the salary I had, but for what I made. One afternoon, 6 months in, a client messaged me, "Hey, our investors love the design. We want to keep you on monthly, double your current rate. Also, any chance you can rebrand our parent company too." That gig alone cleared my rent for 3 months. I cried that night, not because of the money, but because someone finally said, "We want more of what you do. Not who you're supposed to be, just you." That's when I started tracking every cent I made, not out of greed, out of pride. I designed my own invoices, opened a small business account, and applied for my first real credit card tied to my design studio. I remember holding that sleek black card when it came in the mail. There was no name on the front, just the silent weight of everything it represented. Every hour I stayed up late sketching, every time I cried in the shower and got back to work, every voice I silenced that told me I'd never be enough. This wasn't just a card, it was the proof, the quiet answer to 1,000 unasked questions. Still, I never told my parents. Never sent them screenshots, never forwarded contracts, never rubbed success in their faces. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace, but some wounds don't close until you show the scar. Success didn't come all at once. It wasn't a spotlight. It wasn't a viral post or an overnight miracle. It came in the form of an email at 3 a.m. It came in the way I stopped checking my bank account every time I bought groceries. It came in the moment I realized I hadn't cried in weeks. Not because things were easy, but because I was no longer at war with myself. The first time a client referred me to another without me asking, I felt a shift, a soft one, like someone turning the volume down on the part of me that had always screamed, "You're not enough." Suddenly, I was booked 2 weeks out, then a month, then clients started waiting for me, no begging, no undercutting, just honest work that people respected. I rented a tiny studio space downtown. It smelled like dust and wood and history. The windows stuck in the corners, and the radiator rattled like it was haunted, but it had light, the kind of light that made you want to create. I painted one wall black and hung up all the designs that had gotten me here. The logos, the mock-ups, the first sketches from my couch. The things no one had clapped for but me. I made a rule, no more working for free, no more explaining my worth. No more apologizing for not choosing their path. Every invoice I sent felt like a small rebellion. Every payment received felt like reclaiming a part of myself they tried to label as failure. I had money now, not millions, but enough to breathe, enough to build. And instead of upgrading my lifestyle, I upgraded my vision. Better software, a part-time assistant to help with admin, a mentor who'd built a business in the same space. I stopped trying to be impressive. I focused on being good, really, undeniably good, but I still kept quiet. I didn't post flashy updates. I didn't send my parents screenshots of magazine features or the collaborations I was proud of. When my name got mentioned on a design podcast, I didn't even tell my friends. Some victories feel too personal to share. Not because you're hiding, but because they're sacred. Because for the first time in your life, you're not doing it for applause. You're doing it because you survived the doubt and now you want to live. That card, the one they'd never seen, came 6 months into my business. A platinum business credit card, delivered in a matte black envelope with no name on the outside. It felt heavy in my hands. Literally, emotionally, it wasn't just credit, it was credibility, it wasn't just access. It was acknowledgement that I'd built something real, something legitimate, something that didn't need their approval. I held it in my palm that night, sitting alone in my studio, the city buzzing quietly beyond the windows. And I smiled, not out of pride, out of peace. There was still a scar where their words used to live. I still remembered every time they said, "We're not mad, just disappointed." I still remembered the time my father said, "If you walk away from this job, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." I still remembered how my mother's face fell when I said, "No, I'm not going back to school. I'm finally doing what I love." But those words no longer dictated my steps. They were part of the story, not the whole of it. I saw them less, on purpose, not out of hate, out of protection. Because every time I sat in a room with them, I had to shrink. And I was tired of being small in spaces I'd outgrown. So I let the silence stretch between us. I missed birthdays. I skipped weddings. I turned down dinners. I gave them space to sit with the version of me they refused to understand. Still, I knew it was coming. A phone call, a dinner, an invitation to return, not in love, but in curiosity, because they always came back when the noise was loud enough to make them curious. And sure enough, one morning, the text came from my mother. "Dinner next Saturday, family is coming. It would mean a lot to us if you showed up," and no apology. No acknowledgement of the distance, just a summons, but this time I wasn't afraid. This time, I didn't go as the child waiting to be forgiven. I went as the adult who no longer needed to be rescued, who had already climbed out of the pit they'd pushed me into and planted a flag at the top. As I picked out my outfit for the night, clean, simple, no logos, no designer labels, I slipped the card into my wallet. Not for show, just in case. I knew the kind of place they'd pick. Expensive, loud with class, quiet with sincerity. Where the menus didn't show prices, where people wore names instead of souls, and I knew what was coming. The way they'd talk around me, the way they'd casually ask what I was doing now, the way they'd smile with their mouths and measure me with their eyes. But I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for closure. For the moment I could finally sit at their table, not as their project, not as their disappointment, but as a person they couldn't control, couldn't predict, and could no longer ignore. The moment was already taking shape. I could feel it, just like a storm before it rains. And when the bill would come, and they reached for their wallets with the reflex of old authority, I would stop them. I would say, gently, "I've got it," and they would laugh, and then I'd slide the card across the table. And they would stare, and something in their gaze would change just slightly, because they'd realize what I already knew, that I didn't need their seat at the table. I had built my own. The restaurant was exactly what I expected, grand, gilded, and pretentious. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline like a brag. The lights dimmed just enough to make you feel important. The menu was a single cream, colored page, written entirely in French with no prices, the kind of place where the silence was expensive and the ego was plated alongside the appetizers. I was 5 minutes early, that was new. I used to be the one slipping in quietly, apologizing for being late, for existing, for taking up space. But tonight, I came early, calm, collected. I wasn't here to prove anything. I already had. I took a seat at the long table near the back, reserved for the family. Slowly, the rest arrived: my parents, my uncle and aunt, Arjun, of course, 2 family friends from my dad's company. They were all dressed for validation, watches you could hear ticking from across the room, shoes that had never touched dust. smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. My mother kissed my cheek like nothing had ever happened. My father gave me a nod. They didn't say much, but their eyes scanned me, the way they used to assessing for weakness, for failure. They didn't find it. Glad you could make it. My father said, flagging down the waiter like he owned him. Big night tonight. Arjun's closing on a third property, and Divya just got into a Maggie. Applause around the table. I smiled and clapped politely. I wasn't there to dim anyone's light, just to stop mine from being ignored. And you, my aunt asked, sipping her wine, still doing the design thing, still. They always used that word like it was an illness I hadn't shaken off. Yep, I replied, still doing the design thing. It's going well. Oh, my cousin raised an eyebrow. You make any money doing that? A small laugh bubbled around the table, light, mocking, rehearsed. My mother jumped in. He's figuring it out. These things take time. You know how creative types are. There it was. The old mask concern disguised as affection, support that came with an expiration date. I sipped my water and didn't say a word. Dinner stretched on, 7 courses of gold, dusted delicacies and painfully forced conversation. I listened as they debated stock markets mergers, whose kid scored what percentile, and whose vacation photos got the most likes. They didn't ask me a single real question. Not what I was building, not how I was doing, not if I was happy. Because they weren't curious about me, only the version of me they could explain. And because I didn't fit that anymore, they ignored me like static in a clear signal. Until the bill came, the waiter placed it on the table, a discreet leather folder, thick and heavy like a final judgment. My father reached for it out of habit. My mother waved a hand in protest. Please, we'll split it. Everyone pays their part. My father chuckled. Nonsense, I've got it. I watched him confident, practiced, rehearsing his ritual of dominance. Paying was his way of reminding everyone who the provider was. Who is still in control, but this time I didn't let him. I've got it. I said, calm, steady. He froze. Everyone did. The table quieted like the restaurant itself leaned in. What? My father laughed. You don't have to do that. I know. I said, reaching into my jacket. I want to. He raised an eyebrow. My mother blinked, confused. I pulled out the card. Sleek, black. Silent, no name, no shine, just authority. The kind of card that doesn't need to introduce itself. The waiter glanced at it, then at me. Of course, sir. He disappeared with it, as if nothing unusual had happened. But around the table, the silence bloomed. My mother leaned forward, eyes narrowing. What kind of card is that? I smiled. A business card. Business, my father asked. Whose business? Mine, I said simply. I started my own design studio. 16 clients this quarter. International contracts, revenue in 6 figures and climbing. They stared at me like I'd spoken in tongues. You never said anything. My mother whispered, you never asked. I replied. The waiter returned, approved, receipts in the folder, thank you again, sir, sir. My father looked like he'd been slapped with a velvet glove. The table was frozen, no laughter, no mocking, just a heavy, collective realization. I wasn't who they thought I was anymore. And worse, I didn't need them to know who I was. I had made it, on my own, quietly, completely. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents sit in silence. Not disappointment, not anger, uncertainty. They didn't know what to say. I had always lived under their gaze, their rules, their standards. I had always played defense, but tonight, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't brag, I didn't ask for their approval. I just paid the bill, and that spoke louder than anything else. As we got up to leave, my father rested a hand on my shoulder. You could have told us, he said. There was no condescension in his voice, just confusion, a rare softness. I turned to him, not with anger, not with pride, just truth, I tried. I said, you didn't listen. Then I walked out. Not in triumph, in peace, because I didn't come to win. I came to leave on my own terms, and I did.